Hi YouTube. This is a short video demonstrating Sun Salutation A, or Surya Namaskara A. I'm going to go through a few cycles of this Sun Salutation and speak as I move and give you some tips and tricks and alignment cues to make your Sun Salutations more effective and perhaps feel better. So, Sun Salutation A, or Sun Salutations in general, begin at the front of the mat. I don't have a mat down, I'm working on this rug, but you'll be able to see that I basically start and end in the same place. And so I have my feet parallel. I'm a rather narrow individual, and so for me, big toes touching and the heels a little bit apart is a comfortable stance. If you have wider hips, you may want to be more a hip width distance. Generally speaking, you don't want the feet to turn out. And especially you don't want one foot to turn out. So as much as you can, try to make them parallel. The first movement of Sun Salutation A is taking the arms up and overhead on an inhalation. I prefer to take the arms forward and up, and then at the top of the movement you can look up. My hands may be cut off from the size of the room. I can only have the camera so far back. And the reason I like the arms forward is that it prevents, to some extent, overly flaring the ribs. And so what happens is that if someone takes their arms overhead, especially in the forward direction, this is called shoulder flexion, that you reach a point where, let's just say it's here, that the arms don't want to go any further. And so this is the maximum range of motion of the shoulder flexion, that there's some sort of tightness under here or in the pec or some sort of weakness above the shoulder, that this is as far as it goes. And what people will do is that they'll compensate for that lack of range of motion by beginning to back bend. And so they'll flare the ribs and perhaps stick the butt out. I'm exaggerating a bit, but the more I flare the ribs, the more it creates the illusion that this is opened. But if I unflare the ribs, you see that the angle at the shoulder hasn't actually changed. All I've done is create a flare at the ribs. I've created a back bend. And this flaring at the ribs turns my core off. And so if the base of the rib cage stays down, even if the shoulders don't come or the arms don't come fully overhead, that's better for your back long term. And if this stays knitted together, eventually the range of motion of the shoulder will increase. Some people will take the arms out to the sides. And what happens when you take the arms out to the sides is that you kind of avoid that shoulder flexion movement. And so it's very easy to just sort of flare at the ribs like this and to avoid the area that is actually tight. So with an inhalation, the arms go up and overhead. If comfortable in the neck, you can look upwards at the thumbs. Thumbs would be the drishti, or the gazing point for this posture. The next movement is a forward fold, Uttanasana. And I like to, in the forward fold, even with my range of motion, begin it with a bend in the knees. And that bending in the knees allows the lower back to start to stretch and release. Once the rib cage and thighs touch, or the belly and thighs, it is possible that the legs might straighten. But for many, what happens is that they do something like this. They'll take the arms overhead, and then they'll overly lead with the hips. So I'm taking my hips backwards, and then they end up in some sort of position that looks like this. And so the hamstrings haven't really stretched, and the back hasn't really released. But if I bend the knees here, that allows the sacrum and the lowest part of the lower back and pelvis to enter flexion, its forward fold. And then, if possible, you can keep contact of the abdomen and thighs, and maybe the legs will straighten to some extent. For many people, if they maintain that contact of abdomen and thighs and they try to straighten, the legs might start to bounce like this. And that lets them know that they're really reaching the average, the middle point of how much the hamstrings, the back of the thigh, and how much the back itself, the spine itself, want to stretch. Eventually, contact can be maintained and the legs will straighten fully. The head releases, if possible, and the gazing point here could be the tip of the nose, or just down. Pattabhi Jois, we call him propagator of Ashtanga Yoga. Generally, in the beginning, if you read interviews with some of the people that were working with him in the 70s, the 80s, they would say that he kind of gave two drishtis, up and down. So look up, look down. As the Ashtanga system evolved, and I think especially as Sharat took over, the drishtis became more specific. And so with the arms overhead, it wasn't just looking up, it was look at the tips of the thumbs. As you became into Uttanasana, into this fold, it became not just looking down, but perhaps looking at the nose. So those are our first two movements. The third movement kind of goes two ways, and I'm going to teach both because one is available to most people and is useful. The other is quite advanced. And so with this bend in the knees, if the abdomen and thighs continue touching, you can use the thighs as an analog for the floor and treat this like a locust pose or a Shalabhasana. Locust pose would look like this. I'm skipping ahead, but if I'm on the floor, I lift the head, I lift the chest, and then that creates a back arch. And generally speaking, this back arch isn't very high. You will see people that can lift up like a snake and they'll get quite tall in their back, but generally speaking, gravity is taking you down, and the back muscles resisting gravity lift you up to some extent. And that makes the back quite firm. And if you have children, you'll recognize that as tummy time. For most, maybe all human beings, that's our first back bend. So inhale, arms go up, perhaps looking up. Exhale, fold. I like to bend the knees to release the back. For me, my legs will straighten and the abdomen can maintain in contact. And then if I bend the knees and I lift up just like Shalabhasana, the back muscles have turned on. Gravity is again trying to take me down. But if I lift up like this, head, chest, abdomen lift up and off of the thighs, now the back muscles are engaged. I'm reversing that previous forward bend with a spinal extension, or we'll call it a back bend. And then for some, the legs might straighten. You could even lift up higher, and generally speaking, the higher you lift, the more the legs will want to straighten. With time, it's possible that, again, for some, the back can stay engaged, right? It doesn't round, you don't lose it. And maybe the fingertips or the hands can touch the floor. With my proportions, fingertips is nice. If I start to really go hands to the floor, I start to lose the integrity of my back. And people will call this flat back pose, or they'll call it Ardha Uttanasana, Ardha being half. And so if this is full Uttanasana, which translates to intense posture, basically, this would be the half Uttanasana, or the flat back. From there can be a stepping back into a plank. And for many people, bringing the knees to the floor and taking the hands forward of the shoulders is a nice plank for them. With the hands forward of the shoulder, what happens as I lower down is that the elbow can go downwards towards the floor, and it keeps the angle of my wrist quite open. And a lot of people complain about wrist pain in yoga, and so the more this angle at the wrist closes to 90 degrees or less, which is wrist extension, the more people tend to experience pain. And so working with the hands forward and the knees back, knees are behind hips, hands are forward of shoulders, that can be a nice push-up position for a lot of people. It takes the pressure out of the wrist. It allows them to maintain some integrity in their core. It's useful. Now, for some, a straight leg position may be possible, and you can do that by either starting with the legs straight and lowering down, or there's a trick that you can have the knees on the floor to start. You can lower, and if you can stay there hovering without dropping your head too much, then you could try to straighten the legs. And you could even move a little forward to see how that feels on the wrist. Right, that movement, which comes into play as you transition to up dog. So, a couple things to play with there. from the top. Inhale, arms go up. Looking up. Exhale, fold. Ribs to thighs. We're coming up halfway here for our flat back. Again, you want the back to engage wherever the hands are. Maybe they're up here, maybe here, maybe here. And then we move to our plank position. In the beginning, again, stepping is nice for most people. So for that, I have to bend the knees to get the hands in contact with the floor and step back. There can be a lowering, whether that's straight legs or bent knees. And in the beginning, again, I think good for most people to lower all the way to the floor. Lowering to the floor allows you to find a Shalabhasana, head, chest. The tops of my feet are pressing into the floor for this variation. That's created a back arch that is safe for my body, that my back muscles can hold me in this position, and as you can see, I'm talking somewhat comfortably. I could stay here for some period of time. And that might be enough for most people. They could plant the hands from there, push back to like a child's pose type shape, and then they could find their down dog. Now for others, they'll want more. And if you find your Shalabhasana, your locust, you press the tops of the feet into the floor. Right? As I do that, my kneecaps lift and my thighs engage. You could reach the hands a little bit forward and create a little bit of a pull. What I'm doing is I'm pulling forward. As I pull forward, it does lift me a little bit upwards. But I'm not pulling so much that if I take the hands away, I come crashing to the floor. Right? I'm just lengthening my lower back a little bit and creating a little more bend in the mid and upper back. I can take the hands away. That becomes a cobra. And that might be enough for people to then transition through this kind of tabletop, tucking the toes, dropping the butt, and the legs can straighten to down dog. The final progression there is to work with an upward facing dog. And so lowering, whether that's straight legs, bent knees, hands forward, hands back. You have a lot of variations in the push-up. Lifting the head and chest, pressing the tops of the feet into the floor, the knees lift. I can traction the spine by pulling a little forward and upwards. I can check to see I don't crash to the earth. And then if I plant my hands next to my ribs, and I can press the feet down very strongly, and I'm going to push away from the floor, and what's going to happen is that my whole body will lift away from the floor, and I'll keep this same back arch. If I lower to the floor again, you can see I can still hold with no hands. What I'm not doing is pushing up with my pelvis still on the floor. When I let go here, I'm going to come crashing to earth. Right? I went beyond my range of motion. I pushed myself beyond where my back muscles can hold me, and all I'm doing is compressing my lower back. It's not very comfortable. I'm also kind of squashing my shoulders and neck. Right? So I lift, strong legs, same back arch, pelvis lifts off of the floor, thighs are off of the floor. Maybe from there I lift the chest a little bit more and let the hips come a little forward, right? And then the toes can tuck under, so I'm pulling forward with my feet. And I'm rolling over, and this is a downward facing dog. So I'm going to go from the top one more time, and then we'll end this because it ends in reverse. And so feet are parallel. Inhale, arms up. You can look up. This is called Urdhva Hastasana, upward hands. As you exhale, you can fold. Belly to thighs. Inhale, coming up halfway. For your flat back, sometimes you can reach behind your back, feel that it's there. The drishti here would just be looking forward or looking at the third eye, equivalent to looking up. Moving through your plank position. Maybe it's knees on the floor. Maybe you want to try to get stronger here, so you hover for a moment. Lifting the head and chest, pressing the tops of the feet down. tractioning the spine forward for your low cobra. You can still hold it. Upward dog, maybe hips forward, chest and belly forward. And then if you can't do the toe tip flip yet, you can just drop your knees and work like that, tucking the toes under. For some, it will be possible to, I'm pulling my hips forward, that makes my feet slide, and then at some point, they slide enough and I can flip over them. That takes time. It's easier on fabric than it is on a sticky mat. One of the reasons you'll see Ashtanga practitioners put some sort of woven cotton rug over their mat. And then down dog is held for 5 breaths, generally speaking. I like to treat down dog more as a forward bend to counteract the backward bend. And so you'll see downward facing dogs where people will lift the buttock bones and maybe flare the ribs and collapse the chest towards the floor. And this is down dog more as a backward bend. So the buttock bones are lifting and spreading. The ribs can go towards the floor, the chest can go towards the floor, and then the head could perhaps hang. And the extreme of this you see in light on yoga, that Iyengar kind of brings his chest to the floor. I can't quite do that. Well, I can get the head. Maybe he just has the head. Anyways, that's not my preferred down dog. So what I like to do is that I like to bring the buttock bones towards the heel. So it's the opposite pelvic tilt. This is buttock bones in the air, spreading. This is buttock bones pointing downwards. So the front of the hips and the pubic bone is lifting towards the navel. Then the base of the rib cage draws in, and I spread across the shoulder blades. Looking forward and pointing your collarbones at your hands can help you spread the shoulder blades, and then you can drop the head again. This is easier for, well, anyone who's practicing shirtless, really, which tends to be men, although in the privacy of your home or very open yoga studios, perhaps anyone can practice shirtless. But the drishti here is looking at your navel. And looking at your navel tends to make the six-pack engage. And so, for what that's worth. Again, this is kind of like a looking down, but looking at the belly button definitely changes something in the six-pack muscles. This ends in reverse. And so it's a coming forward. In the beginning, it's a stepping to the front of the mat. Finding your flat back pose, right? You want the back muscles engaged. Maybe hands on shins, low shins, tops of feet, fingertips to floor. Some of you will have the proportions. You can have a flat palm. I give myself a little bend in the knees to let the sacrum release. The finishing touch is to try to straighten the legs. And then I like to bend the knees again. Think about the butt dropping as the torso comes up. The arms can raise up. And then it releases to what's called samastitihi or tadasana. Sama means equal or the same. And stitihi is like standing or being. And so standing equally or equal being, it's a neutral stance. So let's go through that one more time. I'll give a little bit less instruction, and then I'll show a variation that doesn't have the flat back. And I'll only show that once. So inhale, arms raise up. Perhaps you look up. As you exhale, you fold. Ribs to thighs. Lifting up like Shalabhasana. Flat back, engages the spine, or the spinal muscles. Stepping back to the plank of your choice. Maybe you freeze for a moment at the bottom, very useful. Lifting up, tractioning the spine. Taking the whole thing into the air, very strong legs and feet here. Maybe hips forwards, upwards, belly forwards, upwards, chest forwards, upwards. And then either dropping the knees and transitioning through your tabletop to down dog, or pulling forward to flip over the toes. If you can, try to look at your navel. If you have to wear a top when you practice, maybe at home, practice topless, so you can get the feeling of what looking at your navel is like. And then when you have to wear a top again, and if that blocks the view, you can at least have some muscle memory. Buttock bones to the floor, rib cage into the body, shoulder blades spread. Inhalation takes you forward to the front of the mat. You'll find your flat back again. Again, maybe you check in with the back, see if it's engaged. You don't want it to be overly rounded here. This is a counter posture for the forward bend of down dog. Fold. This is a forward bend to counter the back bend of the flat back. I again like to bend the knees, that way as the hips drop, makes it easier to lift the spine. The arms raise up, you can look up, and then Samastitihi. And so for most yoga practitioners, that will cover many of the variations, and they can work with the presentation of the posture that feels right to them for some period of time, and then slowly start to add more. The push-up is a good example of that. In the beginning, knees on floor, hands forward. Maybe you don't hover at all. A couple weeks or a month of that. Maybe you can start to lift the knees, or you can hover. Maybe you can start to stack the shoulder and wrist a little bit to begin to close that angle, which will come into play as you start to do arm balances. And then this is a perhaps more, I don't know that I want to call this traditional, but I believe in Ashtanga yoga, the flat back isn't necessarily in the choreography. I feel like that's something that has gotten added in, as yoga has continued to evolve, and as more and more yoga is taught in studios, and as different lineages have pulled in. Traditionally, I believe that flat back shape is actually a shape akin to Lolasana. Lolasana, if you've seen Ashtanga yoga, is the jumping through and jumping back. And I believe eventually it happens in the sun salutation. And you'll see this as people, they talk about floating or jumping. I'll do one, and we'll see how it goes. So it begins the same. Inhale, the arms raise up. Maybe you look up. Exhale as you fold, looking down. And then instead of coming to a flat back here, I'm going to take my hands a little forward. I'm going to lean forward, and I'm going to hover for a moment. And so my spine stays rounded, and I hover, and I land right in the chaturanga. I'm not going to lower to the floor here. I'm going to pull myself forward to flip over the toes, find my up dog from the air, and then I'll flip over the toes to find my down dog here. And so the spine stayed rounded from the forward fold to the Lolasana to the hovering, which is kind of like a half handstand, because, like the jumping through and jumping back, I guess I could have actually jumped through there, that it's a fetal shape, right? And so you can't really do that with the spine extended. The spine has to be rounded for the core to engage. The six pack, like a sit-up. And so this posture, this sequence ends, the exit is just a reverse. And so I'm going to try to come forward. I look forward, I bend the knees a little bit, and I jump, and I try to hover a moment, and then I fold, and then I inhale, come up. And so that would be a sun salutation with a lolasana or a half handstand. And it requires a lot of strength, it requires some practice, but it's akin to jumping through and jumping back from the floor, but a little different. But if I show one more time, inhale, exhale, right? My hands have to come a little bit forward. That might be my proportions, or maybe I'm just not strong enough to hold it from here. You know, I guess there could be enough strength in someone's body to just hold this shape and then let the feet hover. I have to come a little forward and find this cheat. Right? Thighs are still towards chest, leaning forward, let the feet hover, land in your chaturanga, looking forward. You see them sliding back to then slide forward, looking up for your up dog, flipping over the toes, navel for down dog. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 breaths. Looking forward, bending the knees. I try to hover just a second. This is the inhale, right? The inhale is taking me forward. Inhale. Exhale, fold. And then inhale, coming up. And samastitihi. So, a lot of information there. Play with some of those variations. Sun Salutation A is, in many ways, the foundation of most of a yoga practice. That it teaches you to forward bend and back bend, teaches you to bear weight in the arms, including with the arm overhead, and it, over time, will teach you to move with your breath. In the beginning, you're going to need extra breaths as you're stepping back, as you're finding your alignment. You try to make the transitions happen on the correct breath. So the inhale takes the arms overhead, the exhale fold, maybe you need an extra breath, but then the next inhale takes you to your flat back or your lolasana, that hovering. And then an exhale takes you to the floor and your push-up. Or an exhale might take you to your push-up. You have to inhale again, but then as you exhale, you lower down. You might need another recovery breath, and then inhale, find your back bend, exhale into your down dog. Try to catch your breath there, use the down dog as a resting shape. An inhale will take you forward to your flat back or your float. The exhale will take you down, and then an inhale will take you up. And if you need a recovery breath or two at the front of the mat, you take them. And over time, you can start to really coordinate the breath and movement, and you can start to extend and prolong the breath. And, well, all of that comes with time. But in the beginning, you just try to make the breath and the transition work. That generally speaking, inhales take you up, arms up, flat back or lolasana, up dog, and the exhales take you down. Exhale, forward fold, exhale, lower in chaturanga, exhale, down dog, right? Inhale, up dog, exhale, down dog, inhales taking you up, exhales taking you down. It's even in the name of the dog poses. And so that's a little tutorial on Sun A. Sun A's are great. You should do 3 to 5 of them in most yoga practices, as long as you can bear the weight on the arms. So, thank you. Namaste.